Hello, my name's Joe Morrison, and I'm a lecturer here at Queen's University Belfast in philosophy. And I've been asked to say a few things to you now about why I chose to do philosophy when I was going through the kind of UCAS program. So after I was doing my A levels and that sort of stuff. So why philosophy? And I'll try and say a few things about that now in under 2 minutes. So let me see what I can say. To start with, I didn't know what philosophy was, and I think that's totally normal. Most of my colleagues here in the university have no idea what philosophy is. They don't read philosophy, they don't ever engage with it, and lots of people at school never do as well. It's just not something that shows up a lot at school. Some schools offer an A level in philosophy, mine didn't. We had religious studies, and there was a little bit of what they called philosophy on that, but I was into religious studies a bit. I kind of found it interesting, I suppose. My parents are very religious, and I was brought up in a religious family, so sort of thinking about God and that kind of stuff was something we talked about. And so those conversations I kind of found fairly satisfying. But I was studying English and music for A levels, a few other things as well, which we should probably just forget about. Um, so I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed thinking about the idea that when you're kind of diving into a text, there's probably a lot going on that you don't know about, and that the more you scrape at it, the more you get something out of it. You realise that there's sort of interesting layers in there, and also different perspectives that can be brought to it. And I remember finding that very satisfying about studying English, but also studying music. Music has something similar going on. Uh, but also at the time, I guess I was kind of involved in. I listened to a lot of new wave punk music that was sort of around at the time. So there was a lot of talk about the government. I remember one of the bands that I listened to put out a song which was called "I Want to Kill Somebody," which is it just name checked lots and lots of Tory politicians, and just listed wanting to kill them. Or other things. And I remember sort of thinking about punk and or those sort of that sort of agenda where you say things like where you're opposed to the Queen, where you're opposed to the institutions, the establishment, those kinds of things. And I remember thinking that was kind of important and trying to get my head, not knowing much about those kinds of politics, because I was kind of we weren't really taught politics at school, but kind of being really aware of just how bad some of that had got to, that people had been shouting about it since all the way through the 70s, and obviously to when I was a teenager. So the idea, I mean, the Sex Pistols had this lyric that there's no future, and I remember thinking that was kind of tied up in these ideas about politics and rulers and that sort of stuff. So that was a kind of context for me at the time, that I was thinking of those things, but I didn't know what philosophy was. That wasn't like on my agenda. I didn't want to go to university, and then I decided what I might do after I finished my A levels, which I hadn't done that well at. I thought I'd do an A level in philosophy, because some people had mentioned to me that philosophy was a thing that kind of was interested in religions, but also in power, and also in like the idea of whether you've got a future or not, and what kind of control you've got over your future. So philosophy sort of showed up. I think people just mentioned it to me. And someone suggested to me that I should read this book, this short story, and it was just literature, right? So it was just another story, and it was Voltaire, this short story called Candide, which is a sort of satirical story. So it's kind of like a comedy in some respects, but there's a lot of talk of philosophers in that, and I had no idea about what these people had thought, and they're gradually being satirized all the way through this short story, which is really readable. It's really sort of chatty and engaging, and that kind of dragged me in. So that I thought I'd do an A level by correspondence, which meant I didn't have to go to a college or a school, and I just did it. I mean, I went for a few classes, but mostly I was left to my own devices just to read philosophy books and kind of write essays about them. And I read Aristotle, the Ethics, which sounds like it's about ethics, but I think the stuff I found more interesting was not really about the ethics. It was sort of slightly bigger background to some of his views there. I read Plato and Republic, which again seems to be about politics, but in the background there's a lot of metaphysics going on, which has kind of grabbed me a bit. I read Sartre. I remember reading Existentialism is a Humanism, and just sort of completely different, but I found that sort of really challenging. But yeah, that was. I mean, there's a potted summary. I got into it because I was interested in music, reading, uh, a little bit about religion, I suppose, about profound seeming questions, and that drew me into this A level, which I was just able to. I was just basically left to my own devices to read interesting, stimulating things and sort of try and work my way through them, and that's what I've done ever since. I just get to read interesting, stimulating things. Sometimes they're written by my students, and I get to think about those things, and sometimes they're written by kind of other philosophers, and sometimes they're written just in the public domain, and people writing things in interesting articles in newspapers and stuff, but they're food for thought, right? And that's what stimulates me. That's what got me into it. And I suppose what goes with that then is this idea that like it takes actually quite a lot of work to work out what philosophy is and what it can do, and what you're allowed to do, but you're allowed to do a whole load of things, and it all counts as philosophy. It's actually quite a wide open subject in a really interesting way. And people get drawn to it from loads of different backgrounds. So people who are interested in physics, or people who are interested in medicine and health and those kinds of things. People come at it from lots of different angles, and there's something in there for lots of different interests. So that's me. That's all right. 6 minutes. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thanks. Bye bye.